Amen. All right. Hey, so again, open up to Exodus chapter 3, and we're going to go through the entire chapter 3 and the entire chapter 4 as we're looking at Moses as being a person that we want to look at with his encounter with God and how he had a fear of failure. And there's a tremendous amount, I realize, in reading about Moses that he had a fear of failure. And I want to be able to set this up for you. I read an article earlier today that really impacted me a little bit about fear that I want to read a little bit out of. It's called Fear, Anxiety, and the Power of Self-Fulfilling Prophecies. It says, our fears at their worst when they paralyze us. One of the things fear often does is convince us we're the only ones. After isolating us, fear tells us we will never overcome our struggle. Afraid of being rejected, we won't put ourselves out there. Too much exposure. Afraid of some powerful person making a decision which will harm us, we become obsessed with that person's every move, their word and action. Afraid of making the wrong decision, we begin to struggle to make any decision. Afraid this year we will be worse than last year, we will live with bated breath, never really present in any moment, and unable to enjoy what we have. When fears dominate us, they tend to become self-fulfilling prophecies. That's by Scott Savage. And I realized when I was reading this article, this is very much what's happening in all the lives of, and I read all the Bible characters that are jumping out to me, of people who were gripped by fear at some moment. Some ultimately just taking them away from their ultimate destiny, and others just for momentarily what they possibly could have had. We saw last week that God, because of all the people of Israel were gripped by fear, and more specifically the fear of failure, and God skipped an entire generation until the next generation would be the one to go in to the land of the promise, okay, that he was giving them. So we saw that. We're actually going to see that same promise that God had promised to his people. We're now going to see it happening in the life of Moses. So I kind of actually want to go backwards now to Exodus as we look at Moses' life. Now, what's great is I realize when looking at the book of Moses, or the Exodus story about Moses, actually there's a New Testament story of Moses that's given away. And it's given by someone called Stephen. Stephen's actually the first deacon in the church that God brought together in the book of Acts. And Stephen, after he's schooling everybody about the Old Testament, he brings up a whole story part after talking about Abraham. He brings up Moses. And what's interesting is his version of the story brings out some things that you wouldn't naturally pick up from the original version of Exodus. So I want to read to you Acts chapter 7 if you want to turn there. Just momentarily, Acts chapter 7. Stay in Exodus 3 for sure. But I just want to read this to you so we can get a picture of Moses, and I want to draw out some things about him. Because here's the deal. There are 3 ways that fear of failure will disqualify us in the way that it's going to come to us and we're going to feel it, and it makes us feel. It's going to do 3 things. It's going to remind you of your past. Everybody say your past. Come on, say it with some umph in your voice. Past, your future, and your present. Yeah, and what I mean is that it's going to talk about what you previously did. You know, that failure you did. It's going to talk about what could potentially happen to you, like a potential failure. Or it's going to bring up what you currently can't do right now and is just a complete fail. Now, what's great is how God responds to us specifically through this story, through this Exodus story, through Moses' life. God responds to Moses' failures in a way of doing this. Instead of looking at Moses' past, Moses' future, Moses' present, God responds to him by talking about his past, his future, and his present. And so what I mean is that God's going to talk about what he previously promised he would give. God is going to show us the plan that he soon has for them, and then he's going to also do some things that he can right now for Moses. And so we're going to see God encounter Moses in this way. But here's what Stephen had to say about Moses' life. So I want to read this to you. He says, at that time, Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months, he was cared for by his family. and he was placed outside, and Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as one of her own sons. So Moses was adopted into the Egyptian royal family. And so Moses was educated in all wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and in action. Now, I thought that was interesting. So Moses is not just, sometimes when we hear about the story of Moses, we kind of skip this part here. Moses is kind of like a celebrity in his time. And a unique celebrity, like a different celebrity, because he's a Hebrew and everybody knows it, but he's part of the royal family at the same time. So he's educated, right? He's powerful in speech and in action, so he's athletic, right? And everybody knows about him. I mean, he's the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. So he's Pharaoh's grandson, but he's the adopted grandson. So he's like the special Israelite. And he really doesn't have any concept of being born in slavery, although his family is, his brother and his sister Miriam and Aaron, they're going to be kept in slavery, but he doesn't really experience any of that. He grows up basically with wealth and education and everything going for him, right? And he lives the majority in the first part of his life this way. And then something interesting happens as Stephen starts to be talking about Moses' life. He says in verse 23, when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people. So after 40 years, he finally get around to getting to know his family. He's midlife crisis. I want to know where I am, who I'm supposed to be, right? And he saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian. And so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. So he committed murder here, right? And Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. And it's interesting that Moses knew and thought that in his heart, that God had put in his heart, Moses, I'm calling you to get to know your people. And he opened his eyes to their slavery and how they're second-class citizens and they're being enslaved, and this is not right. And then, so Moses, out of his own strength, his own purpose, begins to do something to show them, I'm the one that God is sending. I'm special, right? I'm God sent. And look what happens. The next day, after Moses did this, came upon 2 Israelites who were fighting. And he tried to reconcile them, try to bring them together. Men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, who made you the ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killing the Egyptian yesterday? So now Moses is found to be a hypocrite in the eyes of his own people. And so you kind of see Moses doesn't fit in with his old life, his being this Egyptian who's really a Hebrew, and he doesn't really fit with his own people because he never really was born with them or struggled with them. And going into Exodus chapter 2, from this point of the story, what happens is that then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known, public. And when Pharaoh heard of this, his grandfather, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, to which is where we start in Exodus chapter 3, because now Moses is terrified. He has literally ruined his entire life that was made for him. Of being brought up in the Egyptian, he ruined his whole royalty out the door. He's excluded from the royal family now. He's betrayed the Egyptians who raised him in their culture. And then he's also a betrayal to his own people because he's never actually struggled with them. And he finds no place, so he just runs for the desert. And he starts to live with the Midian people, and specifically Jethro, his father-in-law. And he marries some woman, and now he's living out in the desert for like another 40 years. And then he's dwelling in the desert. And most of you know the Sunday story. Moses comes upon a burning bush, and he's kind of like, why is this bush burning for so long? And it's not burning it up. And so he comes, and then he realizes he encounters God. And this is where we're discovering how God speaks to him. So this is where we are, Exodus chapter 3. Let's read this together. The Lord said, I have indeed seen verse 7, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them. Not Moses. I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing, everybody say, with milk and honey. Yeah, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, and all the other ites. I'm not going to say them all. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So he's encountered this. Now listen, Moses is having a crazy, miraculous moment. None of us are probably going to ever encounter a burning bush, right? We're never going to have that experience, most likely, right? All right? And if you did have an experience like that, send me an email later, okay? I don't really want to know too many details. But here's the deal, though. He encounters something like this, and yet God, the God of the universe, think about this now. God who made everything to be, he's talking to Moses. And look at the next line. Moses has the audacity to say, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Now, listen to this. I want you to hear this out of the Living Bible translation. It says, but I'm not the person for a job like that. That's what it says. I'm not the person for that. And when he says that, he's not saying like, I'm just Joe Schmo, I'm nobody, like he doesn't think that of himself. No, he's thinking, no, I can't go back to that place. I've ruined every chance I have of anything over there. I can't go to Pharaoh and the whole court. They don't respect me. They're liable to kill me if I even set one place that way. And then for his own people, they don't respect me. So he's just thinking about all that whole failure that happened 40 years ago, still in his heart. So when God's telling him this is all still there. It's been there. It's been brewing. Never got over it. Yeah, he got married. Yeah, he got a new job. Yeah, he lives in a new place. And he's probably learned a new language and culture. But this failure is still in him. It's still tracking with him. And this failure, the Message Bible says, where Moses is saying, why me? You know, like, why are you talking to me for? Right? But this fear of failure will disqualify you by your previous failure. That's our first point tonight. I want to make sure you know. So it's always going to, first thing that the fear of failure is going to address is some previous failure. Some past lingering thing that you never got over, and it's always there all the time. But look at God. Look how God responds to Moses. Does God go, oh, okay, well then I'll look for somebody else? No. God says, and God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. I'll prove this to you. Ultimately, you will know this. When you have brought the people of Egypt out, you will worship God on this very mountain. Now, that happens about 16 chapters later, okay? In verse 13, though, Moses says to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of the fathers, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And so really, they're kind of like saying to him, like, if he goes there, he's like, you know, I worship the God of the Egyptians for a time and season. I know the God of the Israelites, and I know the God of the Midians. I mean, for them, they're going to look at me and be like, well, which God are you talking about, Moses? Who are you representing? You've never really represented anything faithfully. There's nothing in your life to show you're a faithful Israelite. You didn't even get circumcised. You didn't even circumcise your son in the right time. You'll see that later on in the story. It's kind of a weird part of the story, but nonetheless, you just see that there's nothing, he's never been really going with the traditions that he's supposed to, okay? And the problem is that that's what he's facing. He's like, I have no track record of being able to be a voice to them. And so God says this. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to tell the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of the fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. And where does that come from? Well, that comes from an old prophecy that God did when he spoke and made a covenant with Abraham. So I'm going to read that covenant with you, that story real quickly. It's in Genesis chapter 15. If you want to go there, you can. Genesis chapter 15, verse 12. And it goes like this. In Genesis 15:12, it says, as the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. So it's kind of like a really scary dream here. And then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. Now God is saying this before this ever happened. Y'all hear me? God already told Abraham that this was going to happen 400 years before he ever talks to Moses. Now, he continues on, but I will punish the nation that they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions, which they do. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoke fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces, talking about the sacrifices that they made. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said to Abram, he said to him, your descendants I will give this land from the Wadi of the Egypt to the river, the Euphrates, and the land of the Canaanites and the other Izzites that I'm not going to mention, okay? And so why am I telling you that? Because when God tells Moses, hey, you don't have to worry about your reputation. You need to worry about my reputation. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God who is faithful to Isaac. I am the God who appeared to Jacob, okay? I am that God. And when I'm speaking to you and you represent me, they will know that I am that God. So, in other words, even though Moses is thinking about his previous failure, God qualifies Moses not on his previous failure, nothing about his old life. He completely qualifies him based on God's ordained promise. His ordained promise. The promise that was spoken way before Moses even was a twinkle in his mother's eye. Or any of his descendants were twinkles in anybody's eye. All right? And so this is what God says in Exodus chapter 3, verse 15. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. I am. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what you have done to you in Egypt, and I have promised to bring you out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites and all the otherites, a land flowing with, everybody say, milk and honey. That's right, okay? Which leads us now into chapter 4, okay? Now, you think that'd be enough. You think that's all the fear that's there, or the fear of failure will deal with you in all of our lives. But no, it goes on. Moses has some more rebuttals for God. More rebuttals. Moses answered, it's such a human thing to say, what if? Right? Here comes the hypothetical question, right? Well, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you, right? And how many times do we do this? Like, you know that there is fear in the room or in your life or in somebody else's life when you start to say, what if? I promise you. I love when I talk with theology with people, and then all of a sudden somebody's going to do but what if? And gives me some hypothetical situation that has nothing to do with Scripture, right? And it just leaves people in confusion. Like, what if God, and just some crazy thing, you're like, yeah, but it's not a what if. It's a completely unrealistic thing. Like, God would never do that to us, right? So Moses brings this what if question. What if the people don't believe me and they say, the Lord did not appear to you? I like the way the Message says it. The Message says, Moses objected at this point to God. He says, they won't trust me. They won't listen to me. They won't listen to a word I say. They're going to say, God appeared to him? Hardly. Yeah, right. God's not going to appear to Moses, right? He's likely to appear to Aaron or somebody else who has a better reputation. Moses doesn't have a good rep for anything, right? So that's his objection. But God has a response to that. And here's what the fear of failure wants to disqualify you for. This is what Moses is thinking about in his mind. As he's building up this what-if scenario, here's what it is. It's your potential failure. Okay? So there's a previous failure that will always be brought up in your life to say, you can't do that. And now, here's the next one. Once you're able to get past that, then it's going to be, well, there's now a potential failure here. There's some potentially you could fail at this, and this stops us from moving forward. We have objections because we're potentially what if scenarios. I don't know. What if this happens? We always bring up this reasoning in our minds. We create scenarios that are going to happen, and then we'll stop obeying God because we just don't trust him. And so here's what happens. I like what A.J. Cronin famously said, worry never robs tomorrow of its sorrow, but only saps today of its strength. In verse 2 of Exodus chapter 4, then the Lord said to him, and I like this, God goes, okay, Moses, what's in your hand? What's that in your hand there, guy? And he says, a staff, right? A stick is this walking stick that he's had for like 40 years as he's been learning to be a shepherd. He's had the same stick that he's been doing this whole time. Now, what's awesome, I love this. This stick has like the awesomest name, in the entire history of humanity. I don't know how people name their sticks. I don't even know if people do that. Okay, I don't know. But if there was such a thing, like people named their sticks, this stick got the best name of all time. This stick, from this point forth, will be called the Rod of God. I kid you not, I'm not making that up. That is a title in the book of Exodus for this boring stick that Moses has, that he's had all his life. Apparently God knew before that staff ever got to be just a branch off a tree, this was going to be the Rod of God, right? This is going to be, so God points out something in Moses' life that's just simple. He's had all his life. He didn't pay any attention to it. It's always been there, and God tells Moses, hey, you see that thing that you have? Yeah, it's a staff. I've always had this. He says, throw it on the floor, because I'm going to show you what I can do. And then, I'm not going to go into this whole thing about all the miracles that God begins to do. Basically what happens, he takes his stick, throws it on the floor, it turns into a snake, and then God tells, and Moses kind of like any of us would, I hope you would, if you saw a snake in here, you would run behind a rock or one of those chairs, all right? And then when you do that, he says, now I want you to pick up. And it's kind of like God is helping Moses overcome his fear a little bit here, right? And he tells, okay, now pick up the snake by its tail, right? And Moses is like, I don't know if I'm gonna, that's not a good idea. But he just takes a chance anyway, and he does, and it turns back into a staff. And then God tells him, all right, take your hand, shove it into your pocket here, and he takes it back out, turns into leprosy, and he's like, oh my Lord, right? Just turns into leprosy. He says, okay, put it back in your hand, boom. All right, your hand's healed, right? And he says, if that doesn't work, then I want you to go and take your staff, tap the river, and the whole river is going to turn into blood, all right? I'm going to show everybody that I am God, and I am with you, all right? Which makes the final point, not the final point, but the third point about the future. When God wants to deal with a potential failure, here's what God reminds us of so that we're okay, all right? He will remind us and qualify us by his imminent power, okay? Imminent means his coming power that he's going to display before people. So God lets us know, hey, I'm giving you my promises. I'm giving you my power, Moses. You don't need to be afraid of what you're going to face. You need to get over this thing. But there's more. There's more. More rebuttals from Moses. Verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord." Now we're getting religious. "I have never been eloquent. I have never been. I'm not this. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." And some people suggest in translations that he's saying I can't speak very well. I stutter when I talk, right? Maybe he does. Maybe he does legitimately. Maybe a long time ago when he was first the man, Moses, he was elegant and he could speak. And then when he had this traumatizing experience, he began to stutter. He lost everything that he learned. He just became uncool in some sense. He lost his whole vibe. He lost the thing that made him the cool Moses in that day. That whole experience ruined him. I don't know. But at this point, Moses is making an objection and saying, I can't speak. I can't talk. And the Lord said to him, and kind of has a real talk with him to kind of be like, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? That's what God says to Moses. Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak. I will teach you what to say. God is always, 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 like this whole time, that's what I love about God. He's always saying, Moses, I'm going to be with you. I will help you. I understand that you're fearing. I get it. But I'm going to help you. I'll be with you. I'm not going to let you down. Don't worry about, this is not on you. I'm doing this. This is my thing. And yet again, Moses has another objection. Verse 13. Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send somebody else. This is completely overwhelming me. I cannot do this. I'm sorry. I thank you for your promises. Thank you for your power. All right, but I'm good. I'm good. I'm in Midian. I got a wife. I got a kid. I got a job. This is nice and comfortable. I'm cool with this. But I bet you, all the while, I don't believe Moses when he says that. I think that he just still had this thing inside of him that couldn't believe that he knew he was called to save his people. He just got the timing off. And here God's ready, and Moses is kind of resisting the whole experience. And let me tell you something, don't kid yourself. We all will be like this. We will all say, no, it's overwhelming, man. Confronting Pharaoh and then leading hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, it sounds good that it's all on you, God, but it really sounds like it's on me. I'm good. I already tried that out one time. It really was an epic fail. All right, and I was so much better back then. And then there's these words, this one verse that kind of hits me. It's verse 14 where it says, then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. And God said, okay, that's it. I've had it with you, Moses. Excuse after excuse. You are useless, and I'm ready to incinerate you. Is that what he says? Now, to be honest with you, if that's what God had really said, all right, which would have been my version of the Bible, I'm just letting you know, all right, I'm just kidding. That would have been justified because it's like, come on, dude, you got promises, you got a magic stick, come on, right? I mean, what else do you want, Moses, right? But God tells him, I'm going to give you my presence. He says, what about your brother? God's still like, all right, fine. You don't want to talk. You feel like that sensitive about your ability to talk. All right. What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you, and you shall speak and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak, and I will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if you were the mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so that you can perform the signs with it. So God qualifies you, right? Or before, the fear of failure will always qualify you by your current inability or disability. Okay, so there's always something about yourself that you know you're not good at, you can't do. It's something like that. And after the previous failure or the potential failure, it's going to be the current failure in your life. That's going to be evident. You're just going to be like, well, I'm not really this. I don't have this ability. But God tells Moses and overcomes him and reminds him of God qualifies Moses by his endless mercy towards him. God continues to say, okay, fine. You don't think that your disability is an issue? It's not. I'll just have somebody else do it with you. All right? And I'll be with both of you because we're going to get this done. And then there's kind of this ambiguous verse between 17 and 18. There's nothing that's really said here other than Moses goes back to Jethro. But the Voice translation did put these two words that I appreciate because it did kind of give a hint to the fact that this is the point that God wanted to get Moses at least. And it puts it like this. It starts off like this in verse 18. Barely convinced. Now, at this point, Moses is like being forced to his happiness. Okay? Being forced to his calling. But he's barely convinced at this point. Right? Kind of just, all right, I'll just kind of keep and you could kind of see he's kind of in a skeptical mood. He goes to his father-in-law, and this is what he says to his father-in-law. Moses returned home and talked it over with Jethro, like Jethro has any authority involved in this matter, okay, right? His father-in-law, right? With your permission, he says, Moses said, I will go back to Egypt and visit my relatives. I don't even know whether they are still alive. Okay? So he kind of says, oh, hey, I'm thinking about going back. Is this okay, Jethro, father-in-law? Even though I built my life here with you for 40 years? And I think that in any way, I think Moses was looking for Jethro to be like, no, you can't leave. You know? I think that's what he was hoping in his heart. Yeah, no, you can't leave. You got to stay here. You're taking my daughter? What are you going to do? You told me your whole past. No way we're not going there. No, but it's funny how even God, even though Moses tries to go about it in a way that's like, it looks like it's the proper way, right? And it is the proper way. He's asking for permission to leave. God uses Jethro to be like, you can go. Right? It's time for you to go, buddy. Yeah, you've been here for 40 years. Get your own house, right? Right? I want to be an empty nester, right? So it's kind of like, and so he says to him, go with my blessing. This is what Jethro says. And verse 19 says, before Moses left Midian, Jehovah said to him, and this is what I love about God. Like, so Moses is now going out, magic stick, Aaron, wife, kids, and he goes out back to his homeland or to where he grew up, right? Unexpectedly going, and this is what God tells him before he goes. Don't be afraid to return to Egypt. For all those who wanted to kill you are dead. It's whatever scenario you think you're walking into, you're not. This is fresh. This is new. This is a brand new opportunity for you. Don't miss this, right? And there's three things I want to end with as we wrap up. Number one, I want to remind you, our previous failures are matched by God's ordained promises. Okay? There's promises here. Our potential failures are matched by God's imminent power. Okay? Promises, power. Our current inability or even disability is matched by God's endless mercy or his presence with us. Always. This whole time, I want to emphasize this for you, and especially as we overcome fear, you need to have the reality of allowing God to continue to remind you that he is with you, that he's not leaving you, he's not forsaking you. That's not the kind of God that he is. Even when you have, an objection to something, even though you're constantly rebuttaling him, some of us, to be honest with you, we're slow. And to be honest with you, with fear, it is a genuine feeling that I don't want you to kind of like, just say, oh, it's just a feeling. No, it's a real thing in our life. But I don't want you to be trapped by it. I don't want it to prevent you from moving forward. Because there's so many people in the Bible where fear grips them and they miss the mark. They miss their opportunity. They miss their destiny, right? Thank God for two people. Like, think about, I don't know if you know the story of Esther, but Esther, she is gripped in this moment where she is the person that God has set up. And she's nothing special other than just being beautiful. But God uses her beauty to be the queen for this king who is about to execute and make real hard suffering for her people. And this is years later. But Mordecai comes to Esther and reminds her, hey, God's going to figure out a way to free his people because he's always going to keep his promise to his people. But Esther, why don't you think about this? Don't you think that you have been put where you are for such a time as this? And I think ultimately that's kind of what came to Moses, as when he was in Egypt, it was good for him, for God. I think God had already put it in his life all around that he had a heart, he had a grip. He didn't want to see his people suffer. And yet, it just wasn't his time. And now the time came. For such a time as this, Moses, it's now time for you to lead the people into the promised land. For you to take them out of the place of suffering and bring them into the place of safety and promise. But there is always going to be fear when it comes to your calling, when it comes for some opportunity for you. It's always going to come up with a past failure, a potential failure, or something right now that you're just like, I don't know. If I try right now, I will flop on my face. It's always going to feel that way. And it's always going to seem worse than it actually is, for sure. And it's going to feel worse than it actually is. My prayer for all of us, I don't know where the applicability of this story goes, because many of us have different scenarios. Many of us are married and we're hoping for our marriage to last, and maybe it's been hard. Or some of you, you're looking for a job, okay? Or for some, and you feel like, I don't know if I can get the job that I would like to get because I'm not qualified, I'm not educated enough. I mean, we do all kinds of things to ourselves to make excuses, to say, well, I don't know if I can do this, even though there's a clarity or there's been a sense that God has been telling you to do this. And you keep rebuttaling, you keep making excuses, you keep putting yourself down about why you can't do it. And it's not God putting you down, it's you. You're their biggest enemy in your life. You are the biggest thing getting in the way for you to be where you could be. If you just get out of the way, and if you just get over yourself, if you just barely be convinced, maybe God will use you to do very powerful and mighty things in your life and use you, right? If you really want to do powerful things, go home and love your families. Go home and care about the little things and that God's trying to point out to you in your life. Okay? Let's stand together. Let's stand together. Let's hold hands. Let's get near. I don't want anyone to be alone.